Why? Seriously, why? Who decided this? And why are they still employed? Don't get me wrong, I understand the actual reason. Yoshi's Island is the new track in this cup. And I understand that Yoshi eats these things. But unless I am severely overlooking something, the one Yoshi game where this does not exist in is Yoshi's Island. And of all the fruits, you chose the apple, but didn't call it the apple cup, nor the berried cup. You stuck with the fruit cup. The fruit cup. The fruit cup. This is hands down, without a doubt, the worst emblem and cup name in the entire game, both in the reasons it was chosen and for what it actually is. At least the double cherry is an actual power-up, and the turnip can be used to throw at enemies. And I'm aware that eating a bunch of these fruits will eventually lead to something in the games they appear in, but that is not enough. At least if you chose the pepper that Yoshi eats in Mario Galaxy 2, we can consider that a power-up because it made Yoshi run really fast. I'd have taken a wing cup for the flying Yoshi, a wool cup as a reference to Woolly World, the umbrella from Yoshi's Story. I would have even accepted the Poochie cup, but instead, they gave us the fruit cup. The Shine Sprite died for this. The moon is a collectible, but it's the main part of Mario Odyssey. I can forgive it. The turnip is an object you can grab and throw at an enemy. It's pretty much the closest thing you can get to a power-up in Mario Bros. 2. We can ignore the Triforce and the Crossing Cup because those are added for obvious reasons. But outside of that, with everything remaining, all of the emblems are either power-ups in the Mario franchise or items from Mario Kart. Except for the Special Cup, which is a Legacy Cup, and the Fruit Cup. So dumb. But hey, the tracks here are pretty awesome. Let's go through them. We are at last in the final quarter. This is video 19 of 24. These are the current scores. This is the reminder of how I'm scoring everything. Let's talk about the tracks represented by the fruit. The first track comes from Mario Kart Tour, Amsterdam Rift. The second track comes from the Game Boy Advance, Riverside Park. The third track comes from the Wii, DK Summit. And the fourth track is Yoshi's Island, a brand new track based off of the sequel to Super Mario World. Amsterdam Drift is an interesting one. The first two laps are very different and it's almost unrecognizable that they are even in the same race. The third lap feels like kind of a mishmash of the first two, but it has some pretty nice moments like the spot where you're driving through all the roses. I also think this race finishes off very strong and it gets very competitive towards the end as a result. I'll be honest, when I clicked on Amsterdam Drift I was expecting a different race, and now I'm not sure which one that one was. But I suppose I'll get to that eventually. But this one was a nice surprise. The fact that the race opens up in a segment that is very similar to Moo Moo Farms actually, and the second lap takes you completely underwater, really makes the track feel dynamic, and that dynamic makes it pretty unique. Part of the fun of this whole experience is I've been creating a list of tracks that I don't play nearly as much that I should play a lot more. They're basically 3-point tracks that I didn't realize were going to be 3-point tracks ahead of time. Mostly because I either didn't know what they were called, and then for whatever reason when I click random they don't pop up as much. Regardless, these tracks that I'm adding to this list are all 3-point tracks. They're just tracks that I did not know were 3 points until I played them. Amsterdam Drift is a 3-point track. I didn't know it was going to be a 3-point track, but yeah. Beyond that, we move on to the Riverside Park from the Game Boy Advance. This one is a lot of fun. Once again, I did not know what this track was called. I don't even think I knew it was from the Game Boy Advance. Mostly because we tend to just run randoms when we're playing online. And I guess I really don't pay enough attention to the names of the tracks. But I know that whenever I play this one, it's always a blast. And it's just another one of those phenomenal Game Boy Advance facelift tracks. There are a few of them throughout, some not quite as exciting as others, but this one appeals to me with the track layout, it appeals to me with the obstacles on the course, and the aesthetic is very appealing to me. I think this is a pretty competitive course to play on, but it has that sweet spot where it's pretty difficult too. Not too difficult, but just the right amount of difficult where you can still test your skills without trying to compete against the track itself. It's simple yet sophisticated, and I am all for that. 3 points. And up next is DK Summit from the Nintendo Wii. If you remember, I said Mount Wario was a 3-pointer, and that was because it reminded me of DK Summit. So obviously, I've always loved DK Summit. It was great back on the Wii, and now it's on Switch. The question is, how does it feel to play in a game where Mount Wario exists in? And does having both tracks in the game feel redundant? If you remember, Mount Wario was a single lap race down a mountain. The downhill drive was broken up into 3 different sections where each of the 3 sections had very different types of obstacles along your path. In this case, it's a loop. You drive down, you make it to the bottom, a cannon blasts you back up to the top, and you drive down again. It's also a pure snowboarding mountain, basically. There aren't any crazy gimmicks, you don't go indoors or outdoors, you don't gotta dodge any trees. They brought back the half pipes and they let you go down and race to your heart's content. I will say that I like Mount Wario more than this one, but I will say that they're also both 3 points. Anytime I play one, I want to play the other. I never feel like it has to be an either or, it's more like I want to do both. They're altered enough where it feels like 2 completely different experiences, and I'm all for them both. Something I really appreciate about DK Summit is that although you're simply going down the mountain, it does provide some sharp turns that require you to be really good at drifting, avoiding thick mounds of snow, and being able to traverse so that you don't fall off the mountain. I usually still fall off the mountain though, but I have a lot of fun on it. This one is just filled with memorable moments for me, whether it was on the Wii or on this version, and I think it's one of the more loved tracks in the game. Pick up the 3 points, and let's head over to Yoshi's Island. No matter what I say after this, I just want to point out that I absolutely love the fact that they created a track from the ground up specifically for Yoshi's Island. I know they technically have references here for the entire Yoshi series, but they definitely put a lot of focus on the actual Yoshi's Island game itself. The way the track evolves as you run through it is a treat. Every new segment makes me excited to look around and see if I can discover something new. The track tends to avoid having too many mundane, straight moments. The settings change from underwater to a cave to being blasted off over a volcano to landing up on top of a cloud. It's a pretty exhilarating track, there's a lot of fun to be had. I do have to analyze whether or not it's the most difficult track, but for now, I think this does everything very well. And I don't think it was overhyped at all. If you grew up on Yoshi's Island or even Yoshi's Story, this track probably really made you happy the first time you played it. 3 points, 3 points, 3 points, and 3 points. By all accounts, these are 4 tracks that I love. But this is where it gets a little bit interesting. So I think the difficulty curve is lost on this one. I was leaning towards saying Riverside Park and Amsterdam Drift were fairly equal, so I was going to give it to Riverside Park being more difficult. But then when I got to DK Summit, I also kind of felt like maybe I was leaning a little bit towards being nice and saying DK Summit is more difficult than Riverside Park. But then I felt like Yoshi's Island might be more difficult than DK Summit, and somehow it's easier than Riverside Park. I actually think Riverside Park might be the most difficult track in this Grand Prix. I was going to cut DK Summit some slack because it was a little bit harder on the moments where you might fall off the mountain, but as a whole, I think Riverside Park is harder to maneuver around. And I feel like it's harder to move around than Yoshi's Island as well. I don't think I know exactly which order I would have these 4 tracks in, and a lot of that is because they feel very similar to one another, in difficulty and in design. While I was trying to figure out whether or not I would get the point for the difficulty curve, which by the way it's not going to get, I realized that I might have to give the diversity a second look, because on the surface I was just going to say 3 points and move on. Amsterdam Drift is a dirt road segment where you're driving with green grass around you. That segment looks pretty similar to the whole of Riverside Park, but that's minor, you might be able to shrug it off. Amsterdam also has some random moments where you're driving underwater, which also occurs in Yoshi's Island. And weirdly enough, the floor in that part also looks like some of the road in Amsterdam, but we can ignore these things, they're small things. In Yoshi's Island you drive through a cave, in Riverside Park you drive through a cave. When you exit the cave in Yoshi's Island, you drive up a mountain where there's snow on the side and a dirt road. If that was grass, that would look very similar to something else, but we can ignore that. And then you fly way up to the sky and work your way back down the track, just like you do in DK Summit. In addition to that, when you actually consider how the maps are laid out and the fact that none of them are all too complicated outside of the tour track, you realize they're just kind of doing the same thing over and over again with slight alterations. Now, someone could argue that all of Mario Kart is doing the same thing over and over again with slight alterations. But I think when I take all of these little things that I noticed and slam them all together, I'm starting to realize why I'm having a problem figuring out if there's a good difficulty curve in this Grand Prix or not. Because even in the difficulty of these tracks, there is no diversity. As a matter of fact, the only thing that's diverse here is the appearance, and that's not even fully diverse. I haven't given a single Grand Prix 0 points. I don't remember exactly what I said earlier on in the series, but I'm pretty sure I said if it has little to no diversity. I am very comfortable in the little diversity ballpark right now. I'm not even remotely on the fence here. I was convinced I was going to give this 16 points. I even tried to make exceptions for difficulty stuff, but even without that, it would have been 15 points. But no, this Grand Prix ends up with 12 points, because it has 4 tracks of 3, and nothing else. No points for difficulty curve, and no points for diversity. Perhaps some may think I'm being harsh, but I don't think I'm being harsh enough because I didn't minus any points for the fact that it was the Fruit Cup. And look, maybe on the surface, when you look at this, 0 points for diversity seems crazy because objectively, how are these all the same kind of track? But in almost every other Grand Prix, when I minus 1 point because something pops up or another point because another thing pops up, usually it's only 1 or 2 things that pop up. There are a lot of things that pop up here, and when you add all those up, you end up with 0 points. Which means while the Grand Prix could have been a perfect cup, or at least close to it, it instead ends up getting the lowest score possible while still having 4 tracks that I love. And good thing too, because I was not looking forward to praising the Fruit Cup. Next, we'll look at the Boomerang Cup.